Intellectual property can play a great role in increasing competitiveness of people both in the fields of business and employment. Yet, it's one of the most neglected resources in Africa, more so in academia. To discuss best how it can be applied in business, we have an economic analyst and intellectual property expert, Ogwang Omuga, together with Dr. Cathy C.mputhia, the founder of C.mputhia Advocates. All right, Ogwang, can you get me good morning?
Good morning, Simba. Good morning, Cathy.
Good morning.
Thank you very much for joining us this morning. Dr. Cathy, good morning. Can you get us loud and clear?
Good morning. Good morning, Simba. Good morning.
All right, let's therefore get into it. And I want to start with you, Ogwang, this morning. We're saying it's a challenge, so we tend to think it's because people don't know this concept of intellectual property. So explain for us the concept of intellectual property. What is it?
My mom taught me better, Simba. I thought it's always the ladies who go first.
We are going to go with that, Dr. Cathy C.mputhia. All right, let's pick it from you.
We are trying to work on gender harmonization. That's very kindly go
Dr.
first.
Cathy, let's go fast. Wow, I'm getting taught this morning.
Yes, so what was the question?
So, what is the concept of intellectual property, since we are saying that it is a very neglected area? So we tend to think it's because most people don't know about it.
Yeah. So in my view, and I'll try to be as simple as possible and not use a lot of legalese here, yeah? So just the name intellectual means it has something to do with the mind. So I define it as the things that you own over creations of the mind, yeah? And that includes artistic creations, scientific creations, songs, graphics, inventions, just basically anything that comes from your mind, and now the ownership of what comes from your mind. Intellectual property rights, on the other hand, is a legal right granted over those creations. So, in my view, intellectual property is the ownership that you have over what your mind has created. But intellectual property rights are the legal rights that are granted by the state to whatever you've created. So we have copyrights, trademarks, patents, and so on. So intellectual property rights are the legal rights granted from the state. Intellectual property is just loosely the ownership of whatever your mind has created.
Pretty much.
Over. Yes?
Yes, Dr. Cathy, if you may allow me to jump in there. Yes, Ogwang, I've had you try define this word, intellectual property, and then I will take you back to what you once told me. It is just the creation of the mind. So for anybody who wants to understand it further, let's pick it from there.
Now, Simba, I like what Dakari has mentioned. Intellect is the creation of the human mind. The most important aspect for us to identify here is that of it or not has a form or another of intellectual property. Do I have intellectual property? The question is, am I aware of the appearance and those appearance take of my forms of intellectual property? And can create something from their mind. It's the responsibility of that individual to follow that, create a market around it. And if I would add, intellectual property is the creation of the human mind in interest of commercialization. So let me give us this. If I create something, not everything that you create from your mind can actually pass for intellectual property. There's a threshold that must be met. So let me give you a very stupid example. My neighbor has a very interesting wife, a very beautiful young woman. If I conceive the idea to steal her from the husband and then I'm arraigned in court, would that pass for intellectual property? So that wouldn't pass for intellectual property. But guess what, Simba? If I reduce that thought into a book, then that book becomes the product of intellectual property. If I reduce my evil thoughts about stealing my neighbor's then that poem becomes property. So while the thought can actually get reprimanded, when that thought is condensed into some other form that a market can grow, then it has met the threshold to be regarded as intellectual property. Intellectual property with converting whatever an individual can create from their mind, from their skill, knowledge that they have. And on what you have said, least exploited form of intellectual in the African continent is knowledge. We have never appreciated that knowledge is actually proprietary.
All right, Dr. Cathy, let me just get back to you, because now I want you guys to make it simple, make it easy for somebody to understand. And that, for my next question, therefore, so take an example of somebody who's in business. Then how is this concept going to get applied to give one an edge, particularly in the line of business? Because everybody keeps on saying, well, I'm into business, but then how do you therefore apply this intellectual property concept to have an edge?
Okay, Simba, I think the first thing that almost every business has a form of intellectual property. Most businesses have brand names or a logo. Like, for example, your TV station. There's a name, Metropole TV, and you have your logo. So already that tells you that you qualify for some sort of intellectual property. The show that we are doing, the show that we are on right now, also qualifies for intellectual property. So the first thing is to encourage business people to have some sort of awareness of intellectual property, because you cannot apply what you don't know. Yeah. So the first thing is to have an awareness of what intellectual property is, and to understand that there are different categories of intellectual property. For example, what I just mentioned with the name, with the brand name and logo, falls under trademark. And encourage businesses to do is to have an intellectual property inventory. Yeah, and that means you list all your goods, list all your services, list all your operations, list everything about your business. Put it in a sort of list, and then you categorize where a certain item falls. For example, if it's a brand, it will fall under trademark. If it's a software, it will fall under copyright. So it's important to have those categories. Then the last thing now to have a commercial strategy. It's a bit technical, and maybe my colleague might help me. A very technical thing, but after you do that inventory, you need to understand what are you going to do about what you have. It does not make sense to protect everything that your business, that you think is an intellectual property, because of the work, the utility. For example, you remember these kids who had, I think they had invented a plane bicycle that could fly or something like that. Do you remember that story?
Yes.
Yeah, I mean, will it make sense for them to try to that potent, which are much better and much, much. So you have to consider if it makes sense to protect what you have come up with, and then after that, short strategy. And I think my colleague, because he's in managing IP.
All right. Now, Ogwang, just before we get to the next part, the ball is in your court right now. And I want you to address this question, Ogwang, in line with what Dr. Cathy wants you to respond to this morning. There are people who are into the Me Me-too business, Ogwang, and that's what we find ourselves in right now. Yes, man, I sell shoes. Yeah, I mean, yes, I deliver. Yes, I sell mobile phones. Me too. How do you identify IP in the line of Me Too business and come up with a proper commercial strategy out of that? I think that's what Dr. Cathy wants to respond to this morning.
Daktari has put it so well. Regardless of the form of that business, we can all of us be selling this, but guess what? All of us, we have different points of departure from the rest. It begins with your name. Regardless, every business has a name. In intellectual property, we seek to harness awareness in an individual to grow value drivers on your name alone. The dollar is worth 68 billion US dollars because that diverse forms of value drivers. The name Coca-Cola, they actually own that font. They own that. You cannot do it by using Coca-Cola font. Most of all Africa, we never quite appreciated that the mere fact an individual sets out to go about business, from that point, what is coming up with? Is it something that already exists, or is it some in that thing that you're doing, the value proposition that you're bringing to marketplace? Business development from everything that an individual actually proprietary. It's not really actually a word. The word proprietary simply means an aspect of ownership. Now let me give an example. If you go to Starbucks to take coffee and someone else goes to Java, that is not in the business of farming coffee. So chances are the coffee that they're getting and the same coffee that Starbucks has is actually the same coffee. The experience that you get around Java and experience that you get around Starbucks, even the setup, the layout. I tell people all the time, if you go to KFC does not manufacture chicken. KFC only owns a way of preparing that chicken and your interaction with that chicken experience you get. In any business that exists, there's always an experience that a client or a customer gets. That individual who is in that space actually is aware of the market avenues that that component alone can help. Then you can exploit it. The way KFC makes their chicken is actually what it's called a KFC technology. In intellectual property, there are two forms of technology. There is technology, the computer aspect of it, and then there is technology, the way an individual goes about their business. If you can identify the way you go about your business, the way you go about your craft, the way you go about your service delivery, then you will identify unique components in you going about. How do you shoot an email, for instance? And as began earlier, if you are looking at knowledge and people have put out in academia, people have put out academic papers, the most important aspect to appreciate is that that premise itself, the one that you go about to explore in your academic writing, that premise is so. But it is the duty of the individual to be aware, as Daktari has said, that is what is uniquely me. I can be in the same space with the Daktari. There are things that she's doing in her practice that is uniquely her. There are things in our practice that is uniquely us. So we are asking, what are the points of departure? We are all reading the same law books. We are all reading the same statutes, but guess what? Our contribution in these spaces are unique. To the extent that these contributions are unique, then they form a huge part of intellectual property resources.
Pretty much, just before I bring in Dr. Cathy, so Ogwang, are you saying therefore that in as much as you might be in the line of the Me Too business, there's something that you're doing uniquely about your business, that is what your intellectual property should be, and you should be aware of that?
That's true. Let me tell you, Simba, the first person that came up with a shirt, right, has never stopped other people from coming up with shirts. You know. How is it that Marks and Spencer, they own the intellectual property in the Marks and Spencer design? How is it and will own a component? As long as men exist, shirt. I'm yet to see a shirt that has buttons from the armpit. But guess what? Always exist. The contribution of one designer to another, in as much as we are in the same space, you should actually own first and foremost your name. Your name has a value drivers at the marketplace. When someone goes and buys a Marks and Spencer, there is a reputation attached to a Marks and Spencer brand. Guess what? The same Marks and Spencer, actually, they don't manufacture apparel. They are not in the business of manufacturing. Chances are they're getting apparel from the same source. But the contribution that they bring in their reputation to, if someone wears a Marks and Spencer, you'll say that's a very serious gentleman. Besides someone just wearing some Kenyan tailored shirts. Yes, Simba.
All right, Dr. Cathy, I want to get you in as well, so you weigh in on exactly what Ogwang is trying to get at, which therefore points us to the next area of our discussion this morning. So are you therefore calling on businesses therefore to start copywriting some of the areas of their businesses? And what is the processes around understanding how you get your copyright?
Okay, so just to get you clear, are you talking about copyright only or all intellectual property?
Just around intellectual property, yes.
It's very important, actually, like my colleague has mentioned, it's very important what your intellectual property is. I think he has brought it out very in terms of understanding what intellectual property. Now, one thing maybe I want to mention is, did you know that intellectual property is actually an asset? It is an asset, and it is an intangible asset. Like, it's not like land or chairs or whatever that you can report in your books of account. And in my view, that will make the value of your is that let's take the example of tech software companies or tech. Yeah, let's say you're starting out and you don't have land, any tangible assets, but you have developments. If you actually get intellectual property for them, that is you can report that as an asset in your account, and you'll find that the value of your company becomes higher than a company that has unreported unreported developments. Take companies like, when they started out, I'm sure they didn't have a lot of assets, but the concept itself and the technology that they had that constituted Facebook is what made the company have a very high value. So one of the benefits of getting intellectual property is that it actually increases the value of your company. It also increases your goodwill, yeah? My colleague has mentioned about Marks and Spencer. He's mentioned about all these, all these designer companies. Do you know that those brands are actually valued? Yeah? The brand itself, the brand alone, has a value. My colleague mentioned that Coca-Cola, is it the brand, my colleague?
Yes.
The name
Coca-Cola.
The name Coca-Cola alone is worth 68 billion. Is it? Yeah, 68 billion. And so in terms of intellectual property strategy, and this is where the money comes in from intellectual property, there are so many things you can do with your IP which you've protected. You can sell it For example, if Coca-Cola were just to sell that brand, they'd make an extra $68 billion. Yeah. If you're to, let's say you're a software developer, you can sell your software or you can license it and so on. So the importance of protecting your intellectual property, other than increasing the value, is it enables you to have a commercial strategy. And let's assume that you cannot take someone to court for infringement of an intellectual property you've not protected. Let's assume that Coca-Cola had not protected the name Coca-Cola. Somebody will come up with Goga-Gola or whatever, or a similar brand. Yeah, and there's nothing Coca-Cola can do because they have not protected their brand. So intellectual property gives you the avenue to enforce or to fight infringement. There are very, very many benefits of intellectual property, which I cannot even mention here, but I'm sure my colleague will add on to this. Back to you, Simba.
Yes, pretty much. All right, now, Ogwang, we are running against time. So now talk to me, therefore, as the principal of Institute of Intangible Resource Awareness, why do you think IP is neglected in our school curriculum? And if so, how best can our learning institutions incorporate intellectual property in their curriculum? And do you think there are policies and systems in place to support IP locally?
There are robust policies, there are robust programs, there are robust interventions. There is something that Dr. has mentioned that I love dearly. Intellectual property is an asset. In as much as intellectual property remains to be property, it doesn't help an individual. It only helps an individual at the point of conversion of making them appear as an asset. So what do I mean? A property is anything, tangible or intangible, that an individual owns that has value. Your shoe is your property, right? Your necktie is your property. Your academic certificate is your property. But it is not your asset. Certain things that we own that are pure. When you have a business name, that business name is only your property. That business name becomes your asset at the point whereby now, but the value drivers in your business name, what Dr. was saying, that you can use it as a point of transaction. That, can I license my idea? Can I enter into joint venture with someone else? That point of departure between a property and an asset, then we need to define what is an asset. An asset is anything tangible or intangible that can be readily be converted into its economic equivalent component. Back to the earlier, I want to steal my neighbor's wife, but I don't want to go about it. So I write a book, but guess what? I lack the which to publish that book. I can license the manuscript, the right in that manuscript to someone else. Guess what? From that mere instance, I will create channels of generating revenue. We are lacking to begin to appreciate IP and the appearance of IP. When we were in school, and I was in school slightly, we used to attend science congresses. Do you remember those science congresses?
Yes, I do.
And guys would come up with innovative stuff. Where did they end up? We used to come up with solutions, and we used to come up with things that actually, I don't want to mention this, but actually there are people that attend some of these science congresses just to steal ideas. We are living in time whereby an idea, in whichever form that idea appears, an idea is a resource. An idea is a raw material. An idea is a form of intangible money. Inasmuch you have paper and someone else has an idea, that paper depreciates in value. Intellectual property is the only resource that I know, and I'm yet to be persuaded otherwise by Daktari, that constantly appreciates in value. The duty of the bearer, the duty of the owner of intellectual property is the duty of that individual to ask himself, in my space, What are those things that are proprietary? Do I own my color? Okay. What are the value drivers in the color or in the shade of my logo? What is the specific value driver in my... The most expensive trademark on earth today is actually a Coca-Cola trademark. Taste the feeling. That trademark, it's worth 23 billion US dollars. So how is it that Coca-Cola can actually create value for the intellectual property? I've been asking myself, what is the value of KCB as a bank? What is the value of one product of KCB? What is the value of University of Nairobi, for instance? So we are leaving a lot of intangible resources that we haven't exploited purely from our approach on intellectual property. The way we approach intellectual property in Africa is this. Can you help me, Mr. Ogwang? Can you help me to secure this so that someone else does not steal it? Can you help me to protect this? I always ask people, whatever you can secure but you cannot exploit is actually worthless to you. So intellectual property first begins with an individual appreciating that there is something that I can do with this. In summation, every idea, if it doesn't open up an industry, is a wasted idea. So what is an industry? An industry is any product or service that has put in place its own supply chain. Before M-Pesa, we used to have this thing that we used to call telegram. Way of sending money was telegram. But guess what? When they developed M-Pesa, M-Pesa has actually put in place its own supply chain, its own delivery. Every idea, regardless of what it is, regardless of how grand or how remote it might appear, should actually create an industry out there. Maybe Daktari might add on where Punguza.
All right. Now, Dr. Cathy, take 30 seconds because we are out of time this morning. For anybody who's therefore listening to you, what do you want them to take out of this conversation, Daktari? 30 seconds.
Okay. I want them to I'm very awareness, and this is because that is lost when you don't understand what you have, don't understand what you own. So there's a lot of resources. There are a lot of videos from WIPO and a lot of videos from people who would help you to understand intellectual property in a layman's way. Yes.
Pretty much. All right. Ogwang Omuga, Principal Institute of Intangible Resource Awareness, and Dr. Cathy C.mputhia, founder, C.mputhia Advocates. Thank you very much for gracing our show this morning. You have been quite invaluable. We can put a value on you guys this morning.
All right. Thank you too.
All right. We take a short break. Once we come back, the Economic Review.